Hello, my name is Zaak Kerstetter and welcome to Catalyze Music Academy. Today I want to take another look at an old Ableton Live device, an old audio effect that has been updated for the brand new Ableton Live 11, which is the Redux audio effect. This is one of many ways to add distortion to your sound in Ableton Live, which is going to add a very kind of digital sounding distortion by degrading or reducing your audio quality through either a bit crusher and or a downsampler. Now this is an audio effect that I ignored for a long time, and then more recently it's been coming more and more into my own productions. In fact, the very first video I did for this channel was about using the Redux to create interesting growly bass sounds. So check out that video if you're interested in that. But I want to take a look at how it's been updated and how this might affect how you end up using the Redux effect. So let's check it out. So before we start cranking up the distortion, let's take a listen to what we're working with, which is just a drum loop that I made. Just sounds like that. And here we have the old Redux and the new Redux. On the old one, there's not really a whole lot of options here. We have an on-off control for our bit crusher, which can be anywhere from 16 down to 1. So as you turn this down, it's going to be reducing your bit depth, starting at 16, going down to 1. Be aware that this does get very loud very, very fast. So you won't notice it so much from about 8 to 16, but once you get below 8, it becomes really, really obvious what's happening and it can get very loud. The other option is the downsampler. This is going to reduce your sample rate, and this is going to basically space out how many samples you're hearing. Generally, when you're working with audio, you have 44,100 samples per second, so this is going to be skipping some of those samples. So as you turn this up, it's going to be playing 1 out of every 20 samples. If you switch this too hard, it can go up to 1 out of every 200 samples will be played. And you'll hear that will just sound like. If you're up super high, it really just kind of demolishes it and doesn't really sound like anything. So those are only two controls, hard or soft, and then on and off, and then our bit crushing here. The new Redux is the same basic idea. We have our bit crusher here. These controls work exactly the same way. And then we have a rate control. So these two knobs do the same thing, but they measure it differently. This is going to be how often it spaces out your samples, and this is going to actually just tell you what your new sample rate is. So as you turn this up, it adds more distortion, and as you turn this one down, it adds more distortion. So it's a different way of looking at it, but gets you the same basic effect. So let's compare it, turning this up from 1 to 20. Sounds like that. Versus the rate. And here if you go down too low, again, it also kind of demolishes it. Same thing if you just crank this up too high. So same basic idea, it goes down instead of up, and it gives you a bit more of an accurate representation in terms of what number you're seeing here and what that sounds like. But basically it sounds the same. The other option you're given here that we did not have access to before is the jitter. This is going to add a little bit of randomness to your rate control, which will end up making it sound a little bit more like white noise instead of just your straight up like digital distortion. You can hear a bit more white noise in there. So when the jitter is low, you get more of that like tonal content to it. As you turn this up, it becomes more like white noise. On top of that, we also have a filter, and this can be either pre or post. So pre, it just is going to filter out anything that comes through it. So we're hearing less of those higher frequencies, and it acts like a low pass filter. So as you turn this up and down, you're going to hear the filter go up with it or down with it. So it's a little bit less harsh if you turn this one on. And then we also have a post filter. So this is actually going to really reduce what you're hearing in terms of distortion. And actually it sounds like a really cool filter, but it's also downsampling. But what if you want to filter it, but you also want to hear a little bit more of that like high-pitched distortion? There is a control here that will allow you to pitch your filter up and down separately than just this control here. So this only works on the post filter. It doesn't do anything on the pre-filter. So if I turn the post on and I turn this down here, we're gonna hear it's filtering out a lot of our distortion. But if I turn this up, it wants us to bring it back in, or I can also turn it down. So I might actually end up using this as a filter because it's kind of like an interesting take on a filter that's gonna be different than, say, like the auto filter. It has a little different character to it. But that's it for the downsample part of the Redux. And then Bit Crusher, again, just to take it as an example, let's listen to the old Bit Crusher first and hear what it sounds like as we turn this down. So that's what it sounds like at 4. I'm not going to go all the way down to 1 because it does get very loud. So as I turn this one down, so one thing you may notice here, it behaves a little bit differently. You'll hear that on the old Redux, it's a bit smoother. And then on the new one, it kind of jumps around. It kind of like almost mutes itself, kind of gates itself. Especially as you keep turning this down, it becomes very choppy. So if you don't want it to have that kind of gating, if you don't want it to be as choppy, you can turn on the DC shift, and that'll make it a little bit more smoother and behave like it does in the old Redux. So, sounds pretty crazy. This should sound very, very similar to this when the DC shift is turned on. And then we also have a shape control. I'm not entirely sure exactly how this is working. To me, it sounds like it's adding a little bit of envelope to the amount of the bit crushing it's doing, but let's take a listen and see how it sounds. So you can see when it's turned down, it's again very kind of quick and very choppy. Whereas if you turn this up, it sounds like it's adding like a smoother envelope to how that's adding distortion. And then lastly, and probably my favorite new option, is the dry wet control. In the old Redux, there was no way to do that. You just had to control the amount. A lot of times I would have to add an audio effect rack with a separate chain that was dry, and then control volumes to get the right amount of bit crushing or downsampling that I wanted. And now it's just built in here, which is great. I love it. This is one of the things I've wanted for a very long time, and now it's here. And then all the rest of it is just icing on the cake. I really like this. This is a much smoother way, it feels like, to do the downsampling. I love the filter. I love the option to either make it quick and choppy or make it a little more smooth. Jitter and shape I'll need to play around with a little bit more until I really figure out how I feel about them. But overall, I think this is a very nice addition to an effect that I was already really starting to grow on me. On top of that, just for the sake of example, like I said in a previous video, I was talking a little bit about using the Redux on a growly kind of bass sound. So what I'm doing here is I'm gonna have a square wave running through a bandpass filter with an LFO to create a sound that sounds like this. And like pretty straightforward. And then if I turn on the Redux, I just wanna see how this sounds and how this compares to the old version, especially as I turn the downsample rate down. I found that when I was using the old Redux, right around 28, 29, 30 sounded really cool to me. You can see that kind of like nice digital vocally kind of sound. So if I turn this one on and I start playing with this control, right around like 1.5 kilohertz to 2K, I think really is really kind of where it sounds really good, right? It's like 11 o'clock area. But again, it gets you a very similar effect to this. So again, these controls behave differently, but ultimately get you the same end result. So like I said, I'm going to be using this quite a bit in a lot of my sound design for just creating gnarly digital sounds. However, now that you have a dry wet control in here, you can control and get the exact right amount of degradation to whatever sound you run through it. So that is it for the Redux audio effect, the new Redux effect. I think it's a great improvement on an effect that I was already really into, and I think is a little bit niche, but I think is really expanding what it can do now that you have even more flexibility with all the new controls. So if you enjoyed watching this video, please subscribe to the channel to be informed about all of the new Ableton Live 11 and beyond content that we'll be producing. I'm releasing at least 2 videos a week for the next couple of weeks just to cover all of the brand new stuff that I'm really, really excited to talk about. And then beyond that, I'm going to keep making lots of videos about all kinds of different sound design and general audio, music production stuff with Ableton Live. So thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you soon.